Hey everyone, welcome back to our study on 2 Peter and Jude. We are in the epistle of Jude, against heresies. And we've been in a larger pericope covering Jude verses 5 through 16, description and condemnation of the false teachers. And here's the outline of what we've already gone through and what we will continue to do. And we are going to cover in this lesson verses 12 and 13 of Jude. So this is part 18 of our study. 6 characteristics of false teachers. And I'm going to read these verses as we go along when we get to each of those 6 characteristics. But first, verses 12 through 13, 6 characteristics of false teachers. After Jude's citations of familiar stories to describe false teachers and their coming judgment, he goes straight to the false teachers themselves, and he identifies them very colorfully. Jude gives 6 characteristics of these false teachers, big meaning in just a few words. So what are they? The first one, these men are blemishes at your love feasts, eating with you without the slightest qualm. Now the word blemishes, if you refer back to 2 Peter 2:13, he uses the same kind of language that we can see in English would be similar, but this is not the same Greek word as used in 2 Peter. Here, Jude uses a hapax legomena. It's the only use of this word in the New Testament, in the Greek New Testament. And it's more equal to a reef, is more accurate translation, a hidden danger beneath the waters for passing ships. So it could be all nice and smooth, and then there's just those little jagged area sticking up. And that's what that blemish is. All right, so the NJB translates it as they are a dangerous hazard at your community meals. And that's the image that Jude is drawing up here. That when these false teachers come together, they are more a danger to everybody else than everybody else being able to help them in to work out their errors, okay? The community meals, agapeus, is a love feast. So what exactly are these love feasts? In Acts 17:11, we see as an example of mutual instruction. In Hebrews 10:24 through 25, at those times, encourage one another. Don't forsake meeting together, but instead spur one another on towards love and good deeds. And then in Hebrews 3:13 and James 5:13 through 20, we see that the reality of life sets in. There's going to be confrontation. There's going to be hard times that people go through. What do Christians do? They gather together. They pray for one another. They help each other out through hard times. They correct people in a loving way if they need to, and many other different examples of that, especially in James 5. And then some other examples of a love feast are in those verses and in that last bullet point there. Now, what are the false teachers doing exactly at these love feasts? If we can refer back to 1 Corinthians 11, verses 17 through 22, that reads, because of the increase of influence of false teachers, love feasts almost altogether disappeared, especially with the application of sexual immorality that some deviously tricked others into practicing. All right, so what's happening in the Corinthian church is like, these love feasts, and they're equating love with all this sexual immorality. And Paul writes that these love feasts have altogether disappeared. And they're like, wait a minute, no, we're doing these love feasts. We're having the times of our lives, But he said, no, what you're doing is not a love feast. This is nowhere near what it should be. The false teachers had no care for their hypocrisy. They did what they wanted without the slightest qualm. All right, and that word qualm has the base word for the Greek word fear, phobos. And the word is ephobos, that they have no fear. All right, they're without fear, as the New King James Version translates. So they boldly and shamelessly are doing these things because, hey, what kind of consequences could there be? That brings us to number 2, shepherds who feed only themselves. It is obvious these teachers, these false teachers, have position in the community if Jude considers them as a shepherd. Now, the way that this is worded, it kind of makes me wonder if Jude is being literal or figurative. Is he drawing up a metaphor? Because if these shepherds are feeding only themselves, what are they feeding themselves with? If it's literal, they could be taking these people's sacrifices and keeping them for themselves, then using it for the recompense or offerings in the temple and such, which was a common practice of very not righteous priests and others, other leaders. So could it be the other way, where he's drawing up a metaphor where he's saying these shepherds are feeding only themselves, that is, by feeding on the weaker people, they're by taking advantage of them? It's not really clear whether he's making it a metaphor or is he being straightforward and literal, but the point is that these shepherds are not doing what a shepherd is supposed to be doing. This particular type of shepherd was to selflessly watch out for others. That is what the shepherds are supposed to do. Instead, they are not doing that. For example, an Old Testament example, Ezekiel 34 verse 2, "Son of man, prophesy against the shepherd of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to the shepherds of Israel who only take care of themselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock?" Straightforward. That's what a shepherd is supposed to do. These shepherds are obviously looking out for only themselves. There's a lot of selfishness, and 1 Corinthians 13:5b, including the rest of verses 4 through 7, clarify that very well. What do these characteristics of false teachers say to the comparison of shepherds and false shepherds? All right, so if these shepherds, these false teachers, false shepherds and false teachers are going about doing things in comparison to what a real shepherd and a real teacher is supposed to be doing, what does that really look like in comparison? Jude is kind of making it a point that, hey, this is kind of obvious, okay? And that brings us to number 3. They are clouds without rain, blown along by the wind. Proverbs 25:14 reads, "Like clouds and wind without rain is a man who boasts of gifts he does not give." All right, so it's kind of like, I could talk the talk, but can I really walk the walk? And these false teachers make false claims for themselves and their teaching, but they do not carry through with them. For example, Matthew 23 verse 4, which is part of the 7 woes to the teachers of the law of Pharisees. What these the Pharisees are doing, teachers of the law are doing, are, let's tell them this is all what they need to do. And they put all these burdens on these people, but they don't help them to fulfill them. And that was what Jesus was getting at. Because you're doing that kind of thing, you're not even helping them. You're just saying, yeah, go ahead and do this. How can you just stand there and watch them with this heavy, heavy load on their shoulders and fail instead of helping them? All right, and these false shepherds are blown along by the wind. They are unstable. Think of truth being self-sustaining. All right, if it's true, it could be held up on its own. It's truth. There's no way to. If you change it, then it's not true. Truth is self-sustaining. It is what it is. All right. Now compare that with falsities. If it's not true, we have to expand on this falsity. We need to change this or change that. They're figuring this out. We got to change the story now. They're not stable. All right. Number 4, autumn trees without fruit and uprooted, twice dead. Similar to the rainless clouds in number 3, they're clouds without rain. All right, they're, the image is, oh wow, it looks like it's going to rain, but by the end of the day, it's still dry out. Nothing's happened. These autumn trees, it's the time for fruit to be picked. It's time for harvesting, but there are no fruit. So if there is no fruit, what happens? They're uprooted. All right, so They're similar to the rainless clouds, but why uprooted, twice dead? There are two possibilities. For example, Ephesians 2, verse 1, dead to sin and made alive in Christ, but then rebelled. All right, so they were living in sin, and the cause of sin is death. The end result is death. But if they're made alive in Christ, then yeah, they're not going to be a part of death. But then they rebelled, so therefore they go into that second death. Another thought is that eschatological judgment is often called a second death, according to Revelation 2:11, 20 verse 6 and 21:8, suggesting that they will die physically while will die spiritually. All right, in the Greek, when what Jude writes here in the Greek puts twice dead before uprooted. So it would be autumn trees without fruit, twice dead and uprooted. All right, so the image that he's drawing up here is the tree dies and it is uprooted. There's no point. It's not doing anything. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. So let's just get it out of there. Let the land sit for a little bit so we can use it again in the next year. The uprooted trees, what do they do with it? You can't build with it. They burn it. That brings us to number 5. They are wild waves of the sea, foaming up their shame. Isaiah 57, 20 through 21 reads, "But the wicked are like the tossing sea, which cannot rest, whose wave casts up mire and mud. There is no peace, says my God, for the wicked." Now, shame, foaming up their shame, this word shame is actually plural in the Greek, so a whole bunch of shame, different shames, covering all that is shameful, not just one particular shameful act. All right, so this foaming up of their shame renders things useless, like the mucky waters. And it's not entirely clear whether or not Jude is referring to the acts that are shameful that are rendered useless, or the people that are doing them are rendered useless. And I would, I'd venture to guess that it would be both. I mean, if somebody's going to continuously practice something that is contrary to what the gospel has provided us, then yeah, it's not going to be useful for the proclamation of the gospel. It's not going to be gospel love towards other people. So yes, those acts are going to be useless. As well as if you're going to continue to practice those things, then yes, you also are going to be in a state of uselessness. That doesn't work. You got to stop doing that. All right, and we're going to get into that in a little bit more. But for now, number 6, wandering stars from whom blackest darkness has been reserved for. All right, these wandering stars, that's kind of weird. That ranks up there with the angelic references that Jude uses. It's a little confusing. What are these wandering stars? The ancients believed the heavens should display order and regularity. If something was off, it told them inevitable chaos might come. Now, for example, these wise men, the magi, see a star in the sky and they're like, oh, that's we know that it's baby Jesus. It's this Messiah that's supposed to come. We want to go see him. So they follow that star. Now, we all get the image in our mind that, oh, it's baby Jesus and it's really nice and stuff. But no, they were most likely scared to death because there is something changed in this astronomy perception. All right, something has changed. Something was different. That means, is this going to be like, how big of a chaotic outcome is this going to be? That is why they want to go see this baby Jesus. This is why they want to go see this so-called Messiah that they may have perceived him as. And the reason why they want to go see that is to see what extent of the chaos it is going to have. Now, they get the idea of, wow, this is different than what we've expected. This is going to be something beyond what chaos is. it's going to go through chaos and bring about a peace. And that is why they avoid going back to inform Caesar about it. Now, as for blackest darkness, that is the absence of light. And I put a capital L there for light, because if this is the blackest darkness, and we're going to be about the light of Christ, that absence of that light, that is the absence of God. All right, so they're reserved for this. They keep, like in verse 6, these false teachers are sentenced until punished for their crimes. All right, now with the words blackest darkness has been reserved forever, Jude alludes to a topic we need to be safe in assuming with, and that is the topic of hell. We can assume a lot about hell, and in fact the New Testament teaches a lot more about hell than it does on heaven. So what exactly is this all about? In the notes that I have for you guys, there is an appendix in the back that I took a little article from the Archaeological Study Bible and typed it out for you, that is about hell. So if you want to read up on that one a little bit, pause it here or just read it after, it doesn't matter, to get a little bit more information on how the ancients understood hell. You can read that. But for now, darkness and fire. If there's fire, there must be some sort of light. That it's kind of contradicting there. So what are the writers getting at then? Darkness, as I mentioned before, is the absence of light, separation from the light, separation from God, okay? Fire, in the meanwhile, is used in refining. All right, so hell is for refining. So, wow, that's kind of weird. We think hell is for this punishment. Well, hell is a place where you get exactly what you want. All right, you want to say that I am my own God, you're going to get that. All right, so hell is for gods, little g gods, where it will take eternity to be refined and perfected to become the God that individuals desire to be. You want to be separated from God to become your own God? That is what this darkness and the fire truly is. All right, so that comes into question, what about God's character concerning hell? All right, love, gracious, merciful, these are just a few among many of God's attributes that we love to glory in. All right, so when it comes to hell, those things are put into question very quickly. God's justice is more often disliked compared to his other attributes because it includes the beckoning to change that which keeps us from getting closer to God. All right, so yes, there's going to be this judgment. There's going to be justice handed out. And in order for that to happen, that means we need to be willing to accept those things in order to become closer to God. Because if this judgment comes and this justice comes and we do not change, then yeah, we're not going to get closer to God, because it is those very things that are keeping us from getting closer to God, and in fact getting further away from God. If we are going to hold on to these things, then we make the proclamation that yes, I am my own God. Where on the other hand, the tough things about God, such as hell, is an example of how God is going to bring us closer to him. Do we want to go to hell? Obviously not. We want to be in the presence of God. I may have brought the question up before, if we went to heaven and God wasn't there, would we be okay with that? And hopefully we're not okay with that, because our goal is to be with God, not just to be in heaven, all right, where the streets are made of gold and there's no chaos, it's all peace, there's no sickness and death. That's a bonus, but the main goal is to be with God. The truth that covers all of God's attributes is that they demand our lives to submit and apply God's ways to our lives, not just certain ones or none at all. It is easy to identify God as anything but ignore prompts, because God is who God really is. All right, we have this preconceived notion of who God is, especially all the nice, good attributes of God, where we can have an idea that, oh, wow, things like hell, Those are attributes that I don't like about God, the judgment and the justice. Because, what about us? Yeah, we all fall short of the glory of God. We all miss that mark. So yes, we obviously are going to have justice dished out to us as well against us. And that's stuff that we don't like. So in our own minds, we create this God in our minds and equate it with Christ, equate it with the God of our scriptures, and say that's what God really is, when he really isn't. A God who loves means love in return. How do we respond to God's love? Do we respond to God's love at all? Justice demands a further dying to self, living for Christ. When justice works in our favor, or when it works to our rectification, how do we respond? If justice is, oh yeah, good, that's been solved, that's been resolved. Oh, wait a minute, on the other side of the same coin, it's being dished out to us. How do we respond to that? In the face of God, we are demanded to continue on to holiness. We need to change. This does not mean we need to be perfect to go to God. This means that we need God even more. That means that we need to humbly come to him saying, yes, I am deserving of hell. And based on God's holy and sovereign character, yes, he's the only one that can say, yes, you are deserving of that hell. And in fact, he does not like that idea. Hell was not reserved for people, and it's only for those fallen angels. But if this is what we want, God is going to respect that and go after that. In the meanwhile, it's going to hurt him. It's going to just, can you imagine God being sad the fact that he's losing someone? And I can see that, because his love goes so deep and it goes so far that yes, he will grieve, he will lament over a loss of someone going to hell, choosing that path to go to hell rather than choosing the path to be with him, where true love is, where true grace and mercy is. All right. So we cannot believe in God and believe our lives are good enough to continue living the way we always have. Believing in God, in truth, demands we do something about that belief. Furthermore, believing in God is not the same as loving God. Let me say that last one again. Believing in God is not the same as loving God. All right. So with all of that, it brings us to questions for discussion, and perhaps questions for self-reflection as well. Okay. Can you summarize into one word the characteristics of a false teacher? How should we protect ourselves from such false teachers and their teachings? What do we use to combat against heresies, against fabrications, and against half-truths? In light of the reality of hell, how then should we present the gospel? How should we therefore live? All right, thank you for joining us in this lesson. We'll see you out there. God bless.